Welcome to the show, Ibidation Sports Talk, up and rolling. It's Thursday. It's We In, We Out Day. It's the anniversary of We In, We Out. We started doing We In, We Out for the first time about a year or so ago. He's Jesse with a freshly shaved mustache, it looks like. Growing
Yes.
out a little bit more. I think this is the first time you've been on this week, isn't it?
It is. It's been a very busy week for one Jesse Stiers.
Get it all taken care of?
For the most part. Enough.
Okay.
Enough to get my head out of the water.
Vince and I did the question about writers yesterday. You know, like musical acts, when they're out on tour, they have a writer for their dressing room. What things would you like? And we, so we asked, what would we want if we had a writer? And I honestly couldn't believe it. The first thing Vince said was a ham sandwich. Now mine was like a popcorn popper, so that I could have like movie popcorn, and then also a soft serve ice cream machine with some chocolate, vanilla, peppermint as the three options to come out of the soft serve. I think mine's a little more sophisticated than the ham sandwich. I don't know about you, Jess.
Yeah, ham sandwiches. Anyone can do that. Like, if I was gonna,
I know.
I could make a ham sandwich in like 2 seconds.
He was like, "Oh, I'd have some ham and some. I think it was like Colby Jack cheese and some mayo." It's like, you get to be a diva here. You get to pick anything you want. And Vince goes with ham sandwich. So, all right, simple pleasures. Good stuff. But yeah, so DK was noting that. Shaquille Oatmeal says he's a fan of the mint chocolate chip. I think we've gone through this before. Neither Jesse nor Vince fan of the mint chocolate chip. That used to be one of my favorites when I was a youngin', but not so much anymore.
I would have, for my rider requests, I'd have a stock of Gatorade Zero.
Okay.
I would have a vending machine stocked with all my favorite chips.
That's a pretty good one, actually. They have to supply a vending machine with specific chips inside. Yes. I like that.
And it is I'll have a couple, like your typical vending machine, basically. You got your row of chips, maybe a row of like sweets, maybe, packs of gum at the bottom. But I would have basically that. I think that'd be pretty much my entire request, is just
your sweet, your salty, and some gum to finish it off.
And then I'd have a drink vending machine as well with Gatorade Zeros, water, Red Bulls, and that's it.
Icy margarita machine is a pretty good call too, Joe.
That is nice.
That. That's a very solid pick. I didn't even think about that. I went Diet Pepsi. Like I went non-alcoholic. Shaquille says flaming hot Cheetos. That's not a bad one either, actually. It's just that then you also would need some of the hand wipes to wipe the cheese dust off especially the cheesy hots. It's like that red cheese dust, so it's like it makes your fingers, I think, even stickier and messier than just the regular Cheetos. All right, it's We In, We Out Day. All the questions submitted by subscribers in the new Champions Lounge, and that's where we pull them from. Got some good questions up there today, and the first one is from our old friend Ballpeen Shillelagh. We in or we out? In the past year, Notre Dame has solidified themselves in the national eye as a perennial playoff contender.
Yeah, I would have to be in on that, and I think that's more so because of Marcus Freeman. I think Notre Dame is a brand that you either love or hate. I think the talent has always been there relatively. But I think Marcus Freeman is a face that people, one, enjoy more, and two, I believe gives more kind of legitimacy to the Notre Dame football program at the end of the day. So I'm going to say yes on that. I'll be in on that.
I'm mostly in on this, although I do still, like we don't do buy, sell, hold. There's not a hold and we in or we out. So maybe it's like, you're in, you're out, or you're sitting on the fence. Maybe like fence is the middle. I think that mostly this is true, but I honestly think that like one more time, back-to-back years in the playoffs is going to solidify, because we're talking about the national perspective here. Obviously, from a Notre Dame perspective, we think this is going to become a regular thing. When you look at the roster and everything else, I think that it's very easy to dismiss Notre Dame from a national perspective in terms of, well, they did it once. Are they actually going to do it again? So I guess I'll go out on this because, again, we're talking about this from the national perspective. I think almost you probably get like 99% of the Notre Dame fan base would be in on this, and I'm pretty in on this as well. But if we're looking at this from a national perspective, outside looking in, I'm going to be out because this is asking right now, like, is this what people think nationally? And I don't think that nationally probably most people are there yet. Next one from Ballpeen, in or out. This is kind of a progression question. I like this. A year from now, Notre Dame will be seen nationally as elite and a perennial title contender. In or out on that one?
I'll be out for now, but I think this question largely revolves around CJ Carr and what he does this season, combined with if Notre Dame can have program success again. If they can be a playoff team and CJ Carr looks like a top 10 quarterback, then I'd be in on this. But for now, I have to say out.
Yeah, I have to agree. And like, actually, I would say, if I went back to the first question, a year from now, I think Notre Dame is going to be seen in the national eye as a playoff contender, because I do think that they managed to get back into the playoff this year. So, like, from that perspective, I would be in. A year from now, nationally they would be seen as a playoff contender. A year from now, Notre Dame will be seen nationally as elite and a perennial title contender. I don't know if I'd go that far, because, again, like, I think with what they have and with the talented, whoever the first time starting quarterback ends up being, I think that they're good enough. The roster is good enough, and the quarterback play is going to be good enough, and the offense and defense are both going to be good enough that they're going to get into the playoff again. But as we saw last year, I mean, it feels like, because of the way things are seeded, like, the playoffs can be a little bit of a crapshoot, in terms of who you get matched up against. Because, look at the fact that Texas, Ohio State, and Oregon were all on the other side of the bracket last year. I mean, you do have to say Notre Dame had a favorable path to the national championship game. And we said that when the draw came out, that we felt better about that side of the bracket than being on the other side of the bracket. So I am out. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I feel more likely that this is a team that gets into the playoff, but can't go full bore in terms of, like, I'm not just going to write them a free pass into the national championship game. So that's why I'm out on that. Next level, 2 years from now, Notre Dame will be seen nationally as the title favorites. In or out on that one?
I just gotta, like, the fan in me wants to be in on all of these, but I just have to go out. I just, it's gonna take a lot, I think, for Notre Dame to really kind of flip that perspective of, being title favorites. Like, they haven't won one yet. They've been to 2 in the last, 20 years. It takes a lot to become a favorite, like that's like encroaching Georgia territory, Alabama territory, Clemson territory when they were good.
Let's just go to the next one then, because he says 3 years from now, Notre Dame will be seen as Clemson or Georgia was for their short years of dominance. So basically, he's saying Notre Dame's going to be playing in national championship games for the next 3+ years.
I'm out on that one too.
Yeah. I've got to be out as well. I think that they will play in national championship games, but again, it's this year that I'm not sure about. Like what does the ceiling end up looking like for this year? Like that's my, like, as confident as we are in both CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey, they still have to answer the bell. They still have to go out there and do it for real. When it's a real live game and not just a scrimmage situation. Again, confidence that they can play really well, confidence that they can get them to the playoff, but there's a lot of things to be learned for them and for us about them along the way. So I'm not saying that it's not going to happen, but the timeline might be sped up a little bit. I would be, again, like on most of these questions, I would be about a year behind what Ball Peen is laying out with each of these.
I agree, and I think a lot of this rides on what happens with either CJ Carr or Kenny Minchey.
Right. DK says, "Stop the Felicia talk. It's 16-0." All right. From Depths 2486, with Notre Dame taking what appears to be that next step as a dominant program with Marcus Freeman, what, in your opinion, would be the next step to becoming elite, the alpha of college football? Not a we in or we out question, but I think that we can answer this anyway. What do you think about this one?
Yeah. I think this is hard because right now the defense is really good. And so what you're assuming is basically the defense is going to kind of hold true to the production that we've seen the last few seasons. And so if that's the case, I still believe what puts Notre Dame over the top as a program is elite quarterback and wide receiver play.
Yes, full agreement on that. That would have been my answer. I had no idea where you were going, especially once you brought up the defensive aspect of it. But, like, we know the secondary has become elite and the defense overall has become elite. But yeah, like specific to how you compete against the Ohio States and Georgias and Clemson's, like especially Clemson of
explosive offense.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be able to lock down or at least go toe-to-toe with those explosive offenses, and the secondary is where it's at. So, like, we know that's there. To me, what puts them over the next level is exactly what you said. Elite quarterback play, and combined with that, the receivers are a much bigger part of the offense. Like that becomes a legit downfield, part of the offense, a modern offense. And ultimately, I think that that's what is going to be, that's the next step for Notre Dame now, because the other pieces are there. The offensive line play is there. The running back room is there. The defensive line is mostly there. This
does enough.
Yeah, that's right. And, we've seen the development there improve. The linebacking core is there. Again, the secondary is there. It's the quarterback wide receiver combination that's going to help Notre Dame take the next step ultimately. Played like a champion, in or out, the continuation of the quarterback battle between Carr and Minchey will help the eventual QB1 be better and more prepared than he would by taking the majority of practice snaps. In short, we in, we out means you believe either Carr or Minchey would improve faster with more practice reps than he will by splitting those reps in the continued competition.
Yeah, I'll be in on this one. I think that naturally, you talk to a lot of athletes, what's going to push them to be better and at their best every day. It's competition, and it's competition against, obviously Minchey and Carr are competing against each other, but they're also, more importantly, competing against themselves at the end of the day. And so I think when you're trying to compete with yourself, the bar is obviously always kind of being moved up. And especially when you see, your counterpart in practice every day, maybe having a good day, you kind of challenge yourself to do better. So I think making this a legit 2-man competition is going to be really, really beneficial for both sides. And then honestly, too, depending on what happens, and I don't want to go too deep in this rabbit hole, but you would hope that whoever doesn't get it would be a really solid backup that season in case something did happen.
For sure. Yeah. I'm in on this one as well. There's no doubt that narrowing the reps down and the more reps that you get, the better off you're going to be, So I don't think you can argue with that. And I think having a direct two-man competition where the battle stands right now is ultimately going to be good. But the more reps you get, the better off you're going to be in the long run. And I think that that's going to be, kind of like a sped up process with the reps just getting now to a two-man competition, and then ultimately when you find out who the guy ends up being. In or out, Joe Rudolph will have the offensive line playing at a championship winning level in late November, December, and January.
I think this question is kind of hard to answer, so I'm just going to say in, and I'm going to say in because I think the offensive line will play better than what it did last season, and they already made a national championship last season. So that's going to be the basis of my answer.
Yeah, I'm in, and I think that when you look at how the offensive line performed against those elite teams during the college football playoff run, especially considering how banged up it was, and the fact that by the end of by the national championship game, Emil Wagner was the last man standing in terms of guys who started on the offensive line at the beginning of the season and was still out there when it was all said and done. And I also think it's interesting that, Joe Rudolph takes some knocks. He's got his detractors, obviously. I was reading about some stuff about Indiana the other day and their spring practice.
Careful.
And
don't talk too long about Indiana.
I know. Can't talk too long about Indiana. You know who one of the guys that people were raving about in Bloomington during spring practice?
Our man's offensive lineman. Yeah, Pat Coogan.
Pat Coogan, the transfer. That's right. And where was he developed? He was developed right here. And apparently, he's the stud of the offensive line down there at IU. He stood out, for everything, that just the way he played and carried himself, I guess, and everything else. So yeah, my answer is yes. For them to be able to perform at the level they did with so many injuries last year and get to the national championship game, were there still some things they had to get better? Sure. Did they still need to pass block better? Of course. But they also played, we've mentioned this a couple of times in the last week, 4 different guys that offensive line faced were drafted within the top 17 picks of the NFL draft, and Notre Dame beat the teams that they played for. So I think that's a pretty good testament to what they were able to do last year. In or out, Adon Schuler will perform like a top 5 safety in all of college football for the 2025 season.
I'll be in on that. I'm really high on Adon Schuler. I thought he was ahead of schedule by some of the performances we saw last year. Really good in coverage. I think the most impressive part about Adon Schuler's game is the way he fills the alley, and the way he sets the edge, and he comes down and he's able to be physical at the line of scrimmage, clean up tackles, that sort of thing. It's anytime you can see a safety come down and help in the run game and really set the perimeter, that's going to be an elite defense, first of all, and 2, that's an elite safety. A lot of guys can cover. Not a lot of guys can come down and make physical open field tackles at the line of scrimmage. So I really respect that about Schuler's game.
Yeah, and I think that's probably, like the tackle aspect is the one thing that he really needs to improve upon. And maybe we see more of that with him kind of being the guy, whereas he was the number 2 out there next to Xavier Watts last year. I just think that we're going to see continued growth from him. So I'm in on it as well. Like we were earlier in the week, we were trying to predict which current Notre Dame players might be ranked in the top 4 of their position groups heading toward next year's NFL draft. And I think Adon Schuler has every opportunity to be in that conversation. So yeah, I think he'll perform like a top 5 safety this season. I think that again, like that room is in just such great shape, whether it's the corners or the safeties. And I think Schuler's going to continue to take off. In or out, Gerby Lambert's injury will not affect his conditioning or his ability to be one of Notre Dame's starting tackles this season.
I'll be in on this. It didn't seem like, Marcus Freeman and staff were too overly worried about the procedure. And there's still things you can do to get your conditioning in, even though that obviously had a surgery. But I think they're high on him, and I think that they obviously came into this with a plan and felt good about it. If they wanted, you don't openly talk about these kind of things, I guess, and be so forthcoming if you didn't really have a plan going forward. At least that's how I take it.
I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical person by any means, but I am someone who has had labrum surgery on both of my shoulders, just like Gerby Lambert had labrum surgery on his. And now, granted, I was, in my 30s in both cases, so I was at least a little bit older than Gerby when he had him. But I can tell you, it takes a while. It takes a while to get that strength back, and just like the ability to be able to, so like that's my biggest concern is just the upper body strength. If he, just how capable he's going to, to be able to be fully physical the way that he needs to be with his upper body. So I am tentatively out. I am anxious to see if we could fast forward 3 months and get to the start of fall training camp. I am anxious to see what Marcus Freeman has to say about Gerby Lambert when camp starts out, just in terms of where he is in his recovery. So I'm not like full out. I do think that, as I've said before, that Lambert is one of the top 7 offensive linemen on this team, fully healthy. He could compete for a spot, but I'm going to hold off a little bit until we find out exactly where he is in his recovery once fall training camp starts. From Domer since birth, in or out, Notre Dame will officially name a quarterback starter prior to the first snap of the Miami game.
Oh, 100%. It'll come maybe a week into fall camp, week and a half.
I think so as well. I'm definitely in on that. Like he's not going to pull a Jim Harbaugh. I don't think that that's going to happen. Like, is there a difference between the two quarterbacks? Could you, because the only other side to this is because there's at least enough of a difference between Minchie and Carr in terms of style of play. You make Miami prepare for both, and so you don't name a starter in advance. Marcus Freeman just has never really played those games, so I think that he's going to name a starter, as you said, relatively early in camp, get that out of the way so it's not a distraction, because the other thing is, the longer you wait to name it, as we do those media availabilities during camp, then other players come out and people are asking them, what are you seeing about, from the quarterbacks and all this different stuff. So I am in. I think that he will definitely name a starter before the season opener. In or out, toppings other than lettuce, tomato, cheese, or bacon in your typical ketchup, mustard, mayo on a burger. In other words, what are you putting on your burger other than those things?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I've stopped putting lettuce on a lot of things. I don't put lettuce on burgers anymore. I don't put lettuce in my Chipotle bowls. To me, it's just kind of been taking up space and really nothing to do. Like I don't mind lettuce, and I eat plenty of salads. It's just I don't like lettuce as unnecessary filler and stuff that's not salad. Like if I wanted to eat lettuce, I'm gonna eat a salad. I'm not gonna put it in my Chipotle bowl for the heck of it. So I'd be in on this. I don't really put anything on my burger outside. Or I guess I would include onion as well. Onion has to be in there.
Yeah, I like some onion every now and then. It's nice, a little change of pace is like if you go onion ring, like if you can make some onion rings and put it on your burger, that's a good call. And crispy onion straws, Tommy says, that's a good one. I like that as well. And typically my burger is ketchup, mustard, pickle. That's it. Sometimes I go bacon. If we go to like Beebs and Ash, they've got obviously different things. I'll go with that. Something I've been doing recently, though, is I've gone pickled jalapenos.
Those are good.
on the burger. I like going that route with some cheese, of course, as well. Onion rings and barbecue sauce, the old Western bacon cheeseburger from back in the day.
Have you ever been a fried egg on the burger guy?
I've tried it. Not a big fan.
Same. It gets too messy.
Yeah.
The egg isn't really. If I had to pick, like, build my own burger, it would have patty, cheese, ketchup, mayo, tomato, onion, bacon, and probably calling it good after that.
Yeah. Joe says smoked pulled pork. I've never been a barbecue. Like we watch Food Network a lot, and in like diners, drive-ins, and dives, and Guy will go to all these different places, and they'll put like pulled pork and or like smoked brisket on it, or even like some. I've seen like fried bologna on like as well as the beef. I've never been other than bacon. I've never been another meat on my burger kind of guy.
Too much going on besides bacon.
Yeah. I just want to taste the burger and the bacon, little cheese, whatever condiments I decide to put in there. Tommy threw one in the chat, in or out on needing Brent Musburger. Try that again. Needing Brent Musburger to come back for one game just to announce Notre Dame is back, baby.
I'll be in on that.
Got to be in on it as well.
Ooh, sorry, not to get caught up on this, but some good pimento cheese on a burger is nice every now and then.
I don't know if I've ever tried pimento cheese on the burger. I've tried the Chick-fil-A pimento, like the jalapeno pimento cheese on the chicken. That's a pretty good one. I found that pimento cheese on something, like the pimento cheese sandwich is one thing, but once you add it to something else, that can get a little bit messy sometimes too, because it wants to, kind of slide off the meat and that kind of thing. In or out, the combination of running backs and tight ends will have more receiving yards and touchdowns. Okay, hold it. The combination of the running backs and tight ends will have more receiving touchdowns than the wide receivers.
I'll be out on that. I think the running backs will have a good amount of touchdowns on the ground. I don't see them having a ton of receiving. I think if all goes right, this offense is like CJ Carr should be built around hitting these wide receivers, and the run game really back it up. So
yeah,
I think the wide receivers are going to have a good year. And if they don't,
I think they're going to have a massive year.
And if they don't, I think there's some serious, you have to really start questioning things, in my opinion, if the wide receivers don't have a good year.
Vince has backed off the wide receiver predictions, the last couple years since he's been so wrong and gone overboard.
I don't want to do it either.
Before. But at the same time, if there's a year to feel good and make big, bold predictions about the wide receivers, this is the year to do it. So I am out on this as well. I think the tight ends are going to be up there. I think the running backs and the tight ends will give nice complementary production, but this is going to be a much more downfield offense than we've seen in several years. So I think we've got that to look forward to. Another food question, in or out, New York style stuffed pizza or Chicago deep dish pizza?
I'd go New York style stuffed pizza. I've been really out on the deep dish thick pizza recently. It just tastes like a greasy, cheesy bread at the end of the day, and not really like pizza. And I know that's what pizza is, cheese and bread, but it just feels like that thick. I don't know. I haven't been a fan of it. And especially too that now my stomach has shrunk a bunch. I don't need all that bread just floating around in there. I like the thin crust. I'm more of a toppings guy and not a bread guy when it comes to pizza.
Yeah, me too. Big time New York style, I'm now New York style stuffed. I don't know exactly what that is. Is that stuffed crust?
I think so.
Okay. Because I like the traditional New York style pizza, like a thin crust, like the undercarriage, as Portnoy calls it, like a nice crispy thin undercarriage, but then like the edge of the crust is a little bit puffed up, like your traditional New York style. So definitely New York over Chicago style for me. Christopher also wants to know, in or out, I finally get to meet Sean and Vince at the Irish Breakdown tailgate before the Miami game. We have not discussed who's going to Miami, and I have not done much traveling. And what usually happens is Vince manages to finagle his way into any good trips before I get the opportunity to say anything. I don't live in the right neighborhood, I don't think. So
Vince always finds himself on the Florida trips.
Yeah. So I will hold on this one. He does, doesn't he? He does. Find himself on the floor.
That light bulb just go off. You're like, huh.
Mm-hmm. D-Troll Hunter, in or out, the round 1 and 2 split NFL draft model. I personally miss the old format.
What is
I'm not sure what this is asking. The round 1 and 2 split NFL draft model. I'm not sure what that means. Do you?
No, and I don't know what the old format is either. Are they saying like rounds 1 and 2, or did they used to do rounds 1 and 2 on the same night?
They might have. I mean, they used to do the draft all on the weekend. It used to be like the draft was Saturday and Sunday, and that was it.
To me, it always felt like the draft and Notre Dame spring game were the same day for the longest time.
There were some times that it went, that they went kind of up against each other, but it's been a while. Fortunately, that is not fun for everybody, who's covering all of that when they're going up against each other. In or out on Florida State bouncing back in 2025.
Depends on anything's a bounce back than what they did last season. Are we talking about
yeah, how far bouncing back? I don't see them like 13-0 bouncing back.
Yeah, I think they'll be over 500 next
season. They'll have a winning record. Yeah.
That's where I'll consider that my bounce back.
Yeah. I'd be in on that. In or out on Clemson hype going into 2025?
Yes, I'll be in on the Clemson hype. I think that they're slowly getting that thing back on track. I'm pretty sure Clay Klubnik is going to be back for another season, so I think that would be his third year as Clemson's quarterback. So I think Dabo's kind of slowly starting to figure out this new era of football, and it's not like Clemson has been bad. They won the ACC championship this past season, didn't they?
They won the ACC championship game. Yeah.
Right. And that's
how they got into the playoff.
Yeah. Right. So, I think they're doing pretty good, and I think they're only going to kind of continue to keep going up.
I'll be in on it as well because I don't see there being a whole lot of other contenders in the ACC. Ray, it's good to have you here too. Glad to have you here, buddy. Always.
What a comment.
Always nice to hear it. He, I've seen him like posting on the YouTube videos after the fact, and he's big on Kenny Minchie. That's fine. If you want to put $100 super chat on it, I'll put 100 of my own bucks behind it, since you are so convinced that you have the inside track to who's going to be the starter. Since you keep pushing.
It's also crazy. The
Kenny
second
Minchie.
Half of that sentence is like, "But you're here," and you took the time to make the comment.
Right, and is obviously
so. Where does that put
been
you?
Here before? Yeah. God's nuclear ICBM. We love Minchie. I'm not saying I don't love Minchie. I just think that CJ Carr is going to end up being the guy.
Well, it's just funny because a month ago I was told.
Am I allowed to have my opinion? I'm the host of this show. This show is about opinions, right? My opinion is it's going to be CJ Carr. Nothing more, nothing less. And, I think other people agree. Not everyone, but others agree.
A lot of people a month ago were saying it's Steve Angeli. There's no way it's CJ Carr. There's no way. Steve Angeli, he's earned it. He deserves it. How could it not be Steve Angeli? Well, look at where we are. Kenny Minchie's not a bad quarterback.
No, he's not.
Carr,
I just think CJ Carr is going to be the guy.
In him. He's got more potential. I think he's ready right now. So on and so forth. But I'm like, I'll go. I'll double down on that with you as well. We can do a 3-way $100 bet here if we really want.
The God's nuclear ICBM. I'm looking for which second part of the comment that you're talking about. Oh, okay. He says he meant no way in hell Minchie beat out Carr. I think I missed that because there were looks like there were a bunch of comments that were flying in fast and furious at about the same time. So crickets from Ray, though. So Irish Eyes. This is the best one. Angeli is the guy, just somewhere else.
And that's fine. He found himself a nice, happy landing spot.
Well, and we'll see what that ends up being between he and Ricky Collins, what that competition looks like. You know, it is interesting, as I talked to Brian Higgins from Syracuse earlier this week, that, you know, as he said, Steve Angeli essentially entered, because we talked about him being in a, you know, like what I said was, well, he's leaving one quarterback competition to go to another. And Brian Higgins said, yeah. And the way I read that is he lost one quarterback competition, and that's why he's in another quarterback competition now at another school.
Yeah.
So completely impartial, you know, observer of this, who will now be covering Steve Angeli at the other side.
Bring up old Jarhead's comment here. We can echo this one all the way in the back of the room.
This is very true. Thank you very much, old Jarhead. If you don't like us, there are other podcasts to choose from. But I do appreciate you being here. We appreciate everybody's opinions. And again, it's my opinion that it will be Carr. It's obviously Ray's opinion that it's going to be Kenny Minchie. And that's fine. If you think that it'll be Kenny Minchie, that's fine. I know there are plenty of people who think that Kenny Minchie's going to end up being the guy. And then Brian says, really so the Kenny crowd will confidently tell you that you were wrong right up until the car is named. Yes. Who was the other one?
I think Josh makes a really good point.
Jesse should do a double or nothing on whether Angeli starts at Syracuse. Ooh.
I'd be up for it. Vince won't take that. I know Vince is done.
Vince was hoping. Did he hit you up today by any chance?
No. Did he want his Culver's today?
He mentioned yesterday that today was Culver's day, and he was talking about hitting you up for it. So,
see, the thing is I would tell him just to send me the bill, but I know he'd run it up. He'd get the deluxe, the large drink, the large fry, and he'd tell everyone else the same.
Yeah, I don't have my ice cream machine yet, Craig. Still, I've got to get to work on that. But I also agree with what God's Nuclear ICBM says. Either or, Notre Dame offense will be in great hands. Concur. Man, the comments are coming in once again fast and furious. And I agree with this, John. Vince will run up the bill. I guarantee you that. Like, he will tell the kids to get extras. Extra sides, it's on Jesse. Get all you want tonight.
He won't even do that. He'll be like, oh, I got us tonight. And then he'd get home and he'd send me the text message. Hey, can you send me the Venmo for that dinner? He'd take the credit and just request the money.
Last in or out from D Troll Hunter. Beer for breakfast.
Out.
I have not done beer for breakfast. I can tell you that much.
If there's anything I'm doing for breakfast, it's orange juice and Jameson.
Ooh, wow.
Irish breakfast shot.
That'll hit you.
That's how you get going.
Have you ever done the beer and tomato juice?
No. Those are I don't even like tomato juice. So
yeah, I'm not a big tomato juice fan. I know a lot of people who'll do that, you know, like as an early morning kind of thing, or mimosas, obviously, I think. But no, I'm not Johnny Cash. I'm not drinking beer for breakfast. So BA 5083 in or out. Malachi Fields will not be that guy in a Notre Dame uniform. He says many point back to his 4 catches for 81 yards against Notre Dame. Let's not forget The 38-yard pass that was actually incomplete if reviewed. The Notre Dame uniform changes players, some for the good, some for the not so good. The pressure is real. What do you say, Jess? In or out on Malachi Fields being the dude for Notre Dame's offense?
I mean, I don't think he's going to be the dude, but I think he's going to be productive and he's going to have a nice season. I think he's definitely more like, like if Jaden Greathouse is Batman, he's kind of like the Robin to his Batman is kind of how I would view it. And if I'm Notre Dame, I'm not putting all my eggs in a basket for a guy that's going to be here just for a year. The plan has to be to continue to develop in-house, 3 to 4 year wide receivers that are going to put out a lot of production. So I think a lot of the effort still has to go into Greathouse, Faison, some of these younger guys, Cam Williams, etc. And I'm not saying that, Cam Williams is going to have a better season than Malachi, but I just think that in terms of if you want to find a way to bring elite wide receiver talent into the room, you have to show these kids that you can develop and get and put out a lot of production, and they can end up getting drafted. Because I mean, when's the last time a Notre Dame wide receiver got drafted high in the rounds? It's been a while. So there's a lot of work to be done at the wide receiver position. I don't think Malachi Field is going to be that dude and change it. I think you got to focus more on guys that are going to be here for multiple years.
I think he's going to be a really good, really productive receiver. Again, part of that goes to who the quarterback is going to be now and the difference in quarterback play from the last couple of years. And, this is a guy who's had 55 and 58 receptions his last couple of years at Virginia. He's been a productive receiver. He's got good size, so I think he's going to be able to give you that on the outside. And, again, if it's CJ Carr, which again, I think it will be, he has the ability to throw guys open and the ability to use that size that Malachi Fields has. I think that that's going to be different. And I think he's going to be a difference maker. Now, that doesn't mean that he's necessarily it's like him over Jaden Greathouse. I think that both of those guys are going to have really big years. But yeah, I think that Fields is going to be a really productive wide receiver at Notre Dame. I don't think he's just going to come here and fall flat on his face, which kind of seems like that's what BA is saying here. He's not going to come close.
The implication.
Yes. From Domer Grizz, in or out, the best championship path for exercising all the demons, narratives, and monkeys on our back is as follows. 1, beating Oregon at home. 2, beating Alabama in the quarterfinals. 3, beating Ohio State in the semifinals. And 4, beating Texas in the national championship game. In or out on that?
I'd be out on that because I like the way I'm looking at this. I like the format and I like the question. I would keep Alabama and Ohio State, but Oregon and Texas, there's no demons in there for me for Oregon and Texas. I'd maybe swap out like Michigan in the first round.
Ooh, I like that.
Go Alabama second round.
Or even Clemson. Even though Notre Dame has beaten Clemson at home a couple of times because it would be a playoff game, Notre Dame hasn't beaten Clemson in a playoff game before. So maybe start with Clemson at home.
I go Clemson, Michigan, Alabama, and I'd have to end with Ohio State in the national championship. I think you got to get that lick back in the national championship.
Yep, I think that's where it's at. Ohio State in the national championship game after losing to the Buckeyes in each of the last 3 years, and all of them, in different fashions. Like that's the one that has to be exercised right there. So I would put Ohio State in the national championship. Alabama.
I got a lot of demons to exercise in this state of Ohio.
Yep, for sure. But I mean, this wouldn't be bad. I mean, that would be just as fun.
No, and that's what I mean. Like it's a good question, and this is a good lineup. It's just I have more personal. Maybe it's. I think Notre Dame has more standing demons than Oregon and Texas. They don't really have too much history with those.
But it would also be fun to have Oregon in a home.
Right? No, yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. From JG Town, in or out, Will Pauling will be Notre Dame's leading receiver in receptions, but not yards. This is an interesting one because he had 74 catches a couple years ago, but he only averaged 11.3 yards. So like he was a ball magnet working out of that slot. Like he was the classic get out of the slot, move the sticks kind of wide receiver with 74 catches a couple of years ago. But I just think because of Fields, who we just got done talking about, and Greathouse as well, because Greathouse had 42 catches last year. I think they're all going to be clustered really close to each other, and you still have Faison in there, not to mention Eli Raritan, who I think is going to get his share, and like this goes back also to the question that Christopher had about would tight ends and receivers have, or tight ends and running backs rather, end up having more touchdown catches. So I think Pauling is going to be an integral part of the offense, but I'll be out on him being the leading receiver. In or out, Notre Dame will average 40 points a game this season.
This is, of the three, I think this is the toughest. For fun, I'm going to say in, but I think it's going to be really close. I mean, they were at 36 last season. You would hope that with an offense that's, going to air the ball out more, that they'd score more. But you also have to realize just because Riley Leonard didn't throw the ball, he still scored a heck of a lot of touchdowns running the ball. This is a really hard question. I think it'll be more than last year, but I don't know if they quite get 40. But for the fun of it, I'm going to say in.
Two years ago, when everybody hated the offensive coordinator, they averaged 39 points a game. And then last year, they averaged 36 points a game. And if you look at it, like you played 4 college football playoff games as well, where your scoring average came down a little bit. You scored in the mid-20s basically on average in those 4 playoff games. So that brought the average down a little. Based on the schedule that they're going to play this season and based on what how the offense is going to be, I'm going to be in. I think that they will top 40 points a game this year. Brian says Faison's the best slot guy on the team by far. I don't know. It's like they got so many slot guys. That's the thing.
I agree. I think there's an abundance of slot.
Yeah.
I'd like some big physical guys.
We in or we out? Notre Dame will have 2 to 3, he says, shout-outs. I'm sure he means shutouts this season.
Out.
Yeah, I got to be out on that. Like, it's just so random. Getting the shutout is so random. Like, coaches will do anything they can just to get that field goal and not be shut out. I think it's tough. I think they'll be fortunate if they have one shutout just because of that. Because, I mean, look at Purdue. Even Purdue scored some points last year, right? So I got to be out on that. Salty getting some questions in or out. The big wide receiver / flex tight end is rising in value in college football in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could do it vice versa too. An undersized tight end, but maybe considered a big wide receiver. I think it goes both ways, but it is definitely rising value because what they want to do is they want to use you as an inline blocker and someone they can split out in the same formation. Maybe they motion you down and you come to the line of scrimmage, and now you're getting into a run play, and they can trust you as a run blocker. Or you start off in the line of scrimmage and you audible into a pass play, and you got to be trusted as a pass catcher. So I think that it is definitely a rising value in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, it's been rising. Like the big receiver / flex tight end. Basically, like the flex tight end is the U tight end, like a Gronk type guy. Those kind of guys who are going to be more, detached. And, like in the slot potentially, or even, sometimes outside versus the Y tight end, which is the, more traditional. You're attached, you're in line, you're down on the line, at the end of the line of scrimmage, blocking and that kind of stuff. And I mean, we've definitely seen, a lot more from that U type, the flex tight end, like he's talking about, like a Tyler Warren kind of guy, like that kind of guy, explosive, twitchier type tight ends. In or out, J-Dog Blair and the Golden One will find their way into too many games to redshirt this season, barring injury. And J-Dog Blair, he put an asterisk, is Jadon Blair. And the Golden One is Dallas Golden.
I think Blair has a better chance than Dallas Golden. So I'm going to say in on Blair. I wish I could say, hold on Golden, but just because I'm not too sure, I'd have to go out.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be out on this as well. Like you said, I think Blair has much more, maybe not much more, but a better chance right now. We saw some good things from him this spring. Not as sure about Golden yet. And, like at the very least, you could see these guys on special teams and, like kind of how Notre Dame has run with the special teams formula and stuff like that, like who they use. And, they kind of have changed the strategy as, like in the playoffs, when you look at some of the guys who were on the field in the playoffs, it looked a lot different than earlier in the season. And I think that that's because you had, a lot of starters out there. And so you wanted to make sure that you weren't, putting too much wear on the tread of the tires, during the playoffs and kind of, resting, allowing some of those other guys to rest. So it very well could happen, but I would be more in on Blair right now than Golden. And I believe that is it. It is. Appreciate the questions, as always. Did you have something else?
No, that was just good timing. I feel like that was the perfect we in, we out segment.
I think so too. Worked it out. It went really well. And so what that means now, are you ready for rapid fire, Jesse?
Let's do this thing.
All right, here we go. Which has the better chance to happen this season? Jadarian Price rushes for at least 1,000 yards, or Kingston Viliamu Asa has at least 100 tackles?
I like this question because I wouldn't say Jadarian Price is second fiddle to Jeremiah Love, but like it's a 1A, 1B situation. And KVA is kind of the same kind of conversation when you're talking about him and Drake Bowen, in my opinion. So I think Drake Bowen's going to be the guy majority of the tackles this season on defense. There's some people who think Drake Bowen's not even going to be a starter by the end of the season, I think, which is really crazy. But I'm going to go Jadarian Price at the end of the day. I think his game and Jeremiah Love's game is going to open up nicely with CJ Carr's ability to pass the ball, get the ball downfield a little bit more. I think naturally that's going to kind of alleviate things for them. So I think both of these guys are really going to be nearing 1,000 yards by the end of the season. And bold prediction, I think both guys, I think they're going to have 2,000-yard rushers.
I'm thinking there's a really good chance that happens as well because, you got to remember, Price ran for almost 750 himself last year. Love had over 1,100 yards, and Riley Leonard ran for over 900 yards. So you take Leonard out of the equation, and sure, we expect more passing yards. The team threw for nearly 3,200 last year, and that's the team, not Riley Leonard, but the team threw for nearly 3,200. And, so like, even though we expect more out of the passing game this year, to your point, that gives you leads. And when you have the lead, what do? You run the ball more, and you've got two fully dynamic running backs in the backfield. I think that there's a really good chance both of these guys, both Love and Price, end up with 1,000. And then, like you look at the tackles, it's actually been 3 years since Notre Dame had a guy hit 100 tackles. J.D. Bertrand had 100 back in 2022. Jack Kaiser led the team with 90 last year, and Viliamu Asa, as part of that rotation, only had 37. I do expect his tackle number to go up, but I think, more than likely it'll probably get into the 80 to 85 range would be kind of my guess if I'm putting a number on it right now. So I think it's more likely that Jadarian Price ends up over 1,000 yards along with Jeremiah Love also over 1,000 yards this season. So I think we're in the same boat. Fill in the blank. The college football playoff era began in 2014, and it's blank that Notre Dame's 109 wins ranked number 5 in the nation in that time.
I might, make a lot of people mad with this next statement, but to me, it's meaningless. You have 0 national championships.
Wow.
Okay. You have 0 national championships, and before this season, you had 0 New Year's Six Bowl victories. I mean, to me, when I look at, sports, whether it's college, professional, I'm very much kind of first or last mentality. Like it's good to be a program that
Ricky Bobby
constantly wins games, and you're in that probably top 80-90%, and in this case you're like in the 99th percentile, but it's just I want a championship, and maybe that's
I think that's what everyone wants, right? They want a championship. I mean, and that's the next step. That's where they're at, because the teams that are in front of them.
That was actually my follow-up question. When I read this question the first time, I was going to ask you, do 1 through 4 have a national championship?
Do you want to guess who 1 through 4 are?
Yeah, it's probably Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. The last one's going to be the hardest. Maybe Clemson.
You got it. Those are the 4 teams that are ahead
of
Notre Dame.
They've
all got national championships.
Yeah, multiple.
And that's kind of my point. And not only have those 4 teams all won national championships, they've combined to win 9 of the last 11 national championships. Michigan and LSU are the only.
So is it unfair to say that it's again, meaningless is too hard, but like.
No, but my point is Notre Dame is right there. They're knocking on the door. They're right behind the 4 big boys in that stretch. All they need now is a national championship to fully solidify themselves, full-fledged, kick down the door. You win a national championship, all the irrelevant stuff, everything else, that won't be a talking point again. Because like, as much as you hear the irrelevant stuff, Notre Dame, in actuality, the only thing they haven't done is win the whole darn thing. Like that's all that they haven't done. They're right there behind the 4 best teams. And it's got to sting a little bit that Michigan sits right behind them. And that's what they've got. I guess it's not right behind them, but I think it's Oklahoma behind them. And then Michigan is next, so like that's literally the only thing missing on the resume right now. Win the national championship, and you don't have to worry anymore about this Notre Dame irrelevant stuff ever again.
Agreed. 100% agree.
But you're going like full bore, sucking on lemons, like it doesn't matter because they haven't won the national championship.
Winning has never been an issue for Notre Dame.
It's winning the big games. But to your point, like you brought up earlier, Marcus Freeman now has won the big games. Like he showed last year that Notre Dame can win those games.
That's when we opened the show. That was the first question. And then that's exactly what it is. Marcus Freeman has really turned things around in terms of perspective and on-field results. He's a likable guy, and he's actually winning the important games. Brian Kelly, super unlikable, never won a meaningful game.
I agree with that. I'm trying to see if I can find that list because I delete. Here it is. It's not. Hang on a second. Yeah, so Notre Dame has 109 wins in that time. Oklahoma actually has 108. Boise State 106, a little bit surprising, against a different kind of schedule, though, obviously. Oregon 103, Michigan 102, Penn State 101. That's the list. Alabama leads the way with 136. Clemson and Ohio State each have 129, and Georgia has 125. This is since 2014. And as Brian said, just don't let Penn State beat you to it. That would be pretty critical, I think, as well. Okay, Jesse. How has what you think of Chad Bowden changed since he left Notre Dame for Southern Cal at the end of the season?
Yeah, I thought about this question a lot, and last season, when he kind of got uncomfortable and he wasn't, here or he was kind of asking for more money and more this and that. It really felt like you could start to feel the pump go on his ego a little bit, right? And ever since he's left for USC, that ego has just gotten super inflated, in my opinion. And the reason why I say that is it really feels like he thinks he is like the integral part of Notre Dame's success
Right.
the last 3 to 4 years,
Like
and
it
that
was more
he's going to be
him
the
than
integral
yeah.
success for turning USC around and getting them back on the map. And the fact that he's, obviously in communications with players who are at Notre Dame still. And I'm sure that anytime that there's the slightest bit of, discomfort, hey, why don't you come over to USC? We got a spot for you. Like it's just going to be an ongoing thing until the kind of the class of guys that he helped recruit are fully through Notre Dame. He's always going to think he's kind of the guy who got Notre Dame back on track, and he's going to be the reason why USC is going to get back on track. And so I just keep seeing this ego inflate. And I'm not trying to take anything away from him. He was a big part of, the recruiting at Notre Dame, but Marcus Freeman was the biggest part. And I think he thinks at times he's probably more valuable than Marcus Freeman.
Well, and look at how the defensive line recruiting has improved in the short amount of time since he's been gone. And the fact that they keep hauling in, even like more guys in the secondary and a receiver, like the recruiting, I think that you could argue in the short amount of time, because I know some people were frustrated. It's like, wait, when are they going to capitalize on the playoff run? Well, they've been getting some hits here in the last month or so, since they've been able to get these guys to commit, the two defensive ends, and like to your point about the in contact with current players, because look, the transfer portal has been closed for not quite a week, and obviously he came right after Kennedy Urlacher, and Urlacher was buried on the depth chart, and that made sense. But sure sounds like he was making a run at other guys who were not in the transfer portal. A lot of tampering type stuff going on, and that's
trying
what
to influence some guys.
Yeah, and that's like,
get in their ear
like,
a little bit.
I get you've got relationships with them, but like that is like digging in the dirt, rolling around in the mud type stuff to me.
But
like at least keep it above the belt, like have a little class, have some class, especially when you're talking about, like a guy, who you worked for, who brought you over here from Cincinnati, who was supposed to be your friend. Have a little class, So like my opinion of him has dropped considerably when you hear about this, like the rumblings of the tampering and all this stuff, trying to poach other guys from the roster who aren't even in the transfer portal yet, when it's obviously very clear, especially had they ended up there, like why they would have ended up there.
100%.
Did you have something else? I feel like I might have cut you off there at one point. All right, so we've got this new game that we play here on the show, and it is called Predict the Vegas Over-Under Season Win Total for different teams. We did Indiana yesterday. That ticked some people off because apparently we talked about Indiana too long, even though we were talking about a lot of other teams as well. But we pick a different team in rapid fire, and we go through the schedule, and we predict what FanDuel has their over-under season win total to be. So today, it is Arizona State. So here's what Arizona State's schedule looks like. They start off by hosting Northern Arizona.
Win.
Then they travel to Mississippi State. Then they host Texas State. They go to Baylor. They host TCU. They go to Utah. They host Texas Tech and then Houston. Then they go to Iowa State. They host West Virginia. They go to Colorado, and they host Arizona. So, Jesse, before I open up my FanDuel app here on my phone, what do you think Vegas is going to set Arizona State's over/under win total for 2025?
9.5.
You're going 9.5?
Yes.
Look at this. Is not an overly tough schedule by any stretch. Like, there is no game on there. There is no game at all where I would say, man, that's a definite loss. Would you?
No.
I don't think so either.
There's really only like 2 or 3 that I'm like, that could go either way. Maybe.
Tommy agrees with you. He's going 9.5. I am Tenzin. I am the son of Aang is going 7.5. Important to note that Arizona State, even though they lost, the guy that everyone seems to love, Cam Skattebo, they returned 17 starters from last year's team that won the Big 12. So I agree with Jesse. I am going 9.5 on this. My initial instinct was 8.5, but looking at the schedule even closer, I think it is a very manageable schedule. So are you locked in on 9.5 before I open this up?
Yes.
Here we go. Arizona State, 8.5.
Wow.
Should have gone with my instinct.
Wow.
With my instinct. I missed again. 8.5 is the number for Arizona State. All right. This is the first time you've done this, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I like it though, and I thought we were going to go through the schedule too, and go like win loss.
Like,
maybe it's more interesting to talk about where the losses could come from.
Yeah, that's true. We can do that on the next one that we do. All right, Mel Kiper Jr.'s reaction to the Shedeur Sanders slide to the 5th round was probably as polarizing as Sanders himself in the draft last weekend. Some people even said Kiper should be fired for doubling down on being so wrong. So my question to you, was Kiper's draft performance good or bad for ESPN?
So here's my thing. This isn't centralized to Mel Kiper. Mel Kiper just couldn't shut up about it the entire draft is what the issue was, in my opinion. There's a lot of people across the board who had Shedeur Sanders, like you talk about like big board, like the guy on NFL Network. I can't think of his name right now, but he had Shedeur Sanders as like his 20th overall prospect, right? Like
Daniel Jeremiah, maybe?
Daniel Jeremiah. I knew it was, I wanted to say his first name was Jeremiah, but I was like, that can't be right. So yes, Daniel Jeremiah. Like this, no one predicted him to be this low. He was a highly rated, on the big board for a reason. I think Mel Kiper's where he went wrong is he just couldn't stop talking about it, and he couldn't stop bringing it up, and he couldn't. Like you gotta drop it and focus.
And then
on
every quarterback that got drafted, in the meantime before Sanders, he kept hitting it again.
And so, if you look at Mel Kiper's resume or track record, he's been doing this for a long time, and he's right more than he's wrong, in my opinion, on overall kind of consensus of how good a player is or isn't. So I have no problem with where these guys had him slated in terms of being a top, a first round pick, top 20 pick, wherever. I think where it went wrong is you start taking the spotlight away from other people on their probably, best day of their life because you want to keep talking about Shedeur Sanders at the end of the day.
Right.
You got to give credit to these other guys, talk about them, they got drafted, that's a lifelong dream for so many people. Like, I think that's where the disservice was, is you took away attention from other deserving people because you just kept talking about Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, I mean, it started right off the top of the draft when Cam Ward gets picked, and Barrett, like literally I had walked into the kitchen, at the start of the draft because, I knew that Cam Ward was going to be picked. And by the time I walked back into my living room, it's like, hold it, what? Jaguars trade to number 2, and it, then it went straight to that. And then, of course, part of that conversation was also because Kiper had Shedeur as his number 1 quarterback. Again, like Cam Ward just got completely lost in the shuffle. And then everything for the rest of the first round became about the fact that Sanders wasn't getting picked. And obviously the next 2 days became about that. But to answer the question, like Mel Kiper, like in his mind, he's right and he's doubling down on being right. I have no problem with that, even though, like he's a draft guy. He's not going to nail every pick, because like they're not up there tipping picks. He's not going to get everything right. At the end of the day, it is still his opinion and his evaluation. And like his whole thing about, the NFL has been wrong for 50 years about evaluating quarterbacks. Well, like Mel Kiper's most famous moment is about going at Bill Tobin, of the Indianapolis Colts, because they took Trev Alberts instead of Trent Dilfer. So like Kiper ultimately may have been right. Like Dilfer did win a Super Bowl, but it's not like Trent Dilfer otherwise had such a great career that like it obviously had to be Trent Dilfer instead of Trev Alberts in 1993. So Kiper was right to a shade. But in this instance, it's nothing but good for ESPN because ultimately the draft is about entertainment and having, eyeballs and opinions. And Mel Kiper obviously has very strong opinions on who he thinks, should go, at different points. Now, like personally, I didn't keep watching ESPN's draft coverage because like it did go overboard to me. But if you look at the draft ratings on ESPN, they were up on Friday and Saturday. Now, a lot of that has to do with Shedeur Sanders and the fact that he was still there. But as Brian M.Y. says, Kiper is the draft. He gets a pass from him. I mean, no one person's name is more synonymous with the NFL draft than Mel Kiper Jr. That's just the way it is.
2 final thoughts on
this.
And
so that's good for ESPN.
I still think Shedeur Sanders is going to be a better quarterback than Jackson Dart. So good luck, Giants. And number 2, no football has been played yet. Mel Kiper could still be right. Shedeur Sanders could still be the starter for the Cleveland Browns next season.
Yeah.
There's still a lot to happen between now and the first game of next season. Like,
wouldn't it be crazy if that happens, by the way?
Exactly. Just because he wasn't, drafted when everyone else thought, like, we're just going to dump on Kiper and everyone and say, oh, you're all wrong. Things could change. Maybe this sparks a fire under Shedeur Sanders and he gets, more of his act together and he trains harder and he becomes a better, like all of the above, like there's still time for this to play out to ultimately decide who was right and who was wrong. Just because they weren't drafted in a certain range doesn't mean that the player isn't talented or good at the end of the day.
Right. Scott says he wasn't doubling down. He was 2,000 times down. Jesse nailed it with stealing dozens of kids' shining moments. I agree with that. Also, Kiper has been terrible historically with quarterbacks. All that may be true. And to a large extent, it is true. Like, because again, like no one's going back and like picking apart every, slot that Mel Kiper, in all of his rankings for the last 40 years, basically. But the point is, people have been talking about it and people were tweeting about it. And the fact that people feel so strongly about it is nothing but good for ESPN. Right. That was the point of my question. Was it good or bad for ESPN? It's nothing but good for ESPN because everyone's talking about it and they had millions of eyeballs on the draft over the weekend. So like you can love him or hate him, but that's what makes good TV. Someone or something that's going to be polarizing, whether it's the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Lakers, Notre Dame, the Dallas Cowboys. Take your pick. If you have just as many people hating as loving, if you have just as many people still on each side, that's what sells.
They're still watching.
Yeah.
If you're a Cowboys fan, you either love watch them or you hate watch them, but you're still watching.
Exactly. Now, you brought up the Cleveland Browns, and obviously that's where Shedeur Sanders ended up going. Kirk Cousins was going into the draft, like he was supposedly on the Cleveland Browns radar. He's going to be 37 years old when the NFL season begins. Falcons general manager Terry Fontenot was on Mad Dog Radio yesterday, and he said that the Falcons are being patient and taking calls about Cousins right now. What do you think Kirk Cousins' future holds, Jess?
He ends up on a team with a crappy that has a crappy quarterback, or he ends up on a team that's desperate for quarterback. But
I don't know who that is though right now.
Well, I do, but it'll kind of lead us into our next question, so I'll wait for that one.
Okay.
Kirk Cousins, I think, still has some football left in him, and if you're like, I hate that I have to do this, but they should have teams should they should look into the strategy that the Giants should have taken, and that's get an old quarterback, find a stopgap for the next year or two while you dig into maybe a quarterback that you like in the next upcoming drafts that you can reset on. I think Kirk Cousins is a perfect kind of bridge the gap type quarterback where maybe you're not really committed on going all in, but you still get a guy with a ton of experience and can be serviceable for a couple seasons. And I think that's what Russell Westbrook's going to do with the Giants. The Giants are just idiotic and drafted quarterbacks for some reason, wasted picks. I don't know why. But I think that's the perfect landing spot for Kirk Cousins, is on a team that might not know what they want to do with quarterback in the next couple of years, but he can kind of give them more time to figure it out.
Yeah, but it feels like the Jets would have been a logical landing spot, or even the Giants before they made the moves to get Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, or obviously Cleveland, before they drafted 2 quarterbacks. And, by the way, I am Tenzin says Watson, Flacco, Gabriel, Sanders. Did I miss anybody? Yes, Kenny Pickett is part of that mix, and Watson is hurt, so he won't actually even be in the mix. So it's going to be Flacco, Gabriel, Sanders, and Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, he's hurt
at least for right now. Brian M.Y. says Seattle. Well, they just signed Sam Darnold, so Darnold is perfectly set up there. And, the Raiders are set right now with Geno Smith. So to me, it really feels like, because the draft is already passed and pretty much everybody else is set, I just think Kirk Cousins is at the stage now at 37 years old that his lot in life is probably just to be a backup quarterback. I think that's probably what he's going to be. He's going to be the veteran, where kind of like maybe what you're saying, next year, if he's able to find a team, it's probably going to be with a team that is going to draft a young quarterback, and Kirk Cousins comes in, he's kind of moving into that Joe Flacco range, because remember, Joe Flacco's won a Super Bowl as well, and which Cousins hasn't. But Flacco is now the veteran. You bring him in as kind of a stopgap. You draft a young quarterback, and he becomes the mentor to the young quarterback. That's probably what Kirk Cousins' lot in life is going to be here over the next few years, as his career begins to wind down now. It's amazing to think that he's 37 years old. I think
there's...
Go ahead.
I think there's 3 potential spots that make sense for Kirk Cousins. Carolina, if Bryce Young can't
but
get it
they got
figured
Bryce
out.
Young. Yeah.
I don't, as crazy as it sounds, I don't think Minnesota is off the table.
I've actually heard that that could actually happen. But again, he's going to go be a backup to J.J. McCarthy if that happens. He's not going to compete for a job.
I think that Pittsburgh obviously makes sense. And honestly, Tennessee might make sense too, just to be while you have Cam Ward. Will Levis is not an NFL quarterback, and he's not even an NFL backup quarterback. So those are kind of the 4 spots that I think. You got Carolina, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, and Tennessee are 4 teams where he'd probably be a backup at 2 of them and maybe contend to be a starter at the other 2.
And so Irish Ice has brought up Rodgers and Pittsburgh, and that is leading into this next question here. If you're the Steelers, do you keep on waiting for Aaron Rodgers, or would you make a move potentially for Kirk Cousins?
Do I get to put on, what's his name? Arthur, the GM for the Steelers. Is that his name, Arthur? Anyways, do I get to put on the GM cap? Is this Jesse the GM, or is
Jesse the GM? Have at it.
Jesse the GM would say, Aaron Rodgers, you're old. You tore your Achilles. Your days are beyond you. You're an old dog at this point. And I don't I personally wouldn't want everything that's coming with Aaron Rodgers at this point. His media baggage, I guess, is what we could call it. And I don't think he's all in on being a competitor anymore. I don't think he's mentally locked in and as sharp as he is of wanting to be great at football. I think those days are past him. I think he has other interests in life, and he's not 100% committed to being a good football player and someone who can like lead or turn around a franchise and seriously lead them through the playoffs. So as crazy as it might sound, I would tell Aaron Rodgers just to kick rocks and roll my dice with Kirk Cousins. I think there's less to lose with Kirk Cousins. Obviously, there's more to gain with Aaron Rodgers, but when you factor in everything, the Steelers have shown that they don't want an elite quarterback. They're completely fine with average quarterback play because they want to rely on their defense so much. So if that's truly your mentality, why bring in all the media baggage and aging, old, injured Aaron Rodgers back when you can just go with good old reliable Kirk Cousins? Like, that's Kirk Cousins' definition of his career, just reliable. He's consistently reliable. And so until you figure out what you want to do at quarterback, just go with Kirk Cousins. I think it's so much less painless to go with him than it is Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah. Omar Khan, by the way, the Pittsburgh Steelers general manager, Arthur Blank is
the owner,
the Falcons owner. Yeah. So you had your teams kind of turned around a little bit. Yeah. Like between the two, one, like they both had the injuries a couple of years ago. And so now they're both Rodgers and Cousins are, just about 2 years removed from those injuries. I guess, since the full recovery, probably about a year and a half or so by the time the season actually starts. But Cousins is younger. And I don't know why, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, you would want to keep waiting on Aaron Rodgers, because Josh was asking, is Rodgers getting calls right now? I think that the Steelers are just waiting for Aaron Rodgers to make a decision. That is, it's like it's either going to be Pittsburgh or nothing. I know.
That's why just tell him to make a decision or kick the can, man. Get out of here.
Now you are going to have to give something up. You're going to have to give up some draft capital for next year to go out and get Kirk Cousins, because it would have to be a trade.
That's true.
Whatever his salary looks like and everything else. But like, Rodgers showed like the Jets, the Jets made the trade to bring in Devontae Adams, and they had Garrett Wilson, and it's like you had that, and the Jets looked no better than what they did.
It just didn't look like he cared out there.
Yeah. So I would just move on and go with steady Eddie Kirk Cousins. That feels like the better stopgap to me if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. Just go with Cousins and just tell Rodgers, so long. See you later. That feels like that's the only place that either one of them is going to be a starting quarterback this year, is Pittsburgh.
Yeah, 100% agree. It just seems like Aaron Rodgers is like, oh, like, you guys can wait on me. I'm Aaron Rodgers, like, when I make my decision, I make my decisions.
Yep.
I just don't think he's in that point of his career anymore to be making those kind of demands. And like you said, the Jets did everything he asked, and they still were not good,
No.
So it's like, why would you bring all that in? Because he's going to have demands. He's going to be a diva about some stuff. He's going to want this. He's going to want that. For what? To be 500 again? To make the playoffs by one game and be knocked out in the first round? I don't know.
No, I agree. I completely agree. Like, Aaron Rodgers has been a diva every place that he's been. I don't know why Mike Tomlin would think that it would be any different in Pittsburgh. And they've got the weapons, like in terms of the receivers, like either one of those guys is going to have it, but Rodgers had it last year again with the Jets, and it didn't pan out. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Jess, enjoyed it as always. Good to see you for the first time this week. I will see you mañana. Appreciate the questions for We In, We Out. Thanks for the lively chat. Even Ray, have a good day. We will talk to you later. If you're still here, smash the like button before you leave, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.
Get my $100 ready.